So welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Simon Chamorro. We're doing a live stream, and he's the CEO and co-founder of Value. And welcome to the show, Simon.
Thank you, Stewart.
Yeah.
Nice to be with you today.
Yeah. So really excited to talk to you. What is Value?
So Value is basically a neobank for migrants. And specifically, we're targeting Venezuelan migrants in South America. Because as you probably know, the country has lived a really bad political and economical situation during the past 20 years, I would say. And in 2016, food shortages, we had food shortages in Venezuela, and the lower class started to migrate for the first time. But the thing is that they don't have enough money to pay for planes, so they just walk through the border to Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Ecuador. And since 2016, South America has seen the largest diaspora in its history, internal diaspora. And we're talking about 6 to 7 million people that are living now in South America, which are migrants, refugees, you can call them whatever. But they now have the need to send money back home to their families to support them. But also, they don't have enough credit history or paperwork to get into the financial system to the countries where they're arriving. So we're basically building a way for them to send money back home initially, and in the second stage for them to save money in their phones, almost like as a digital wallet. And nobody's really targeting them. We're starting with Venezuela, and then we're going to also target Argentina and Mexico.
Interesting. And the first piece of that is traditionally done by places like Western Union. And then I know that there's some cryptocurrency startups that have tried to do this as well. And I imagine that they haven't succeeded. And I heard of some in Africa that were doing something similar. But Western Union is kind of like a ripoff, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, we actually, we were doing some tests and we went to Western Union because they apparently are now sending money to Venezuela, which we thought it was weird because Venezuela is a closed economy. And the only way you can send money to a closed economy is through a black market, which is super dirty, or through crypto. And we thought like, whoa, how is Western Union doing this? Because they actually had left Venezuela after the whole political situation. And we went there and they're charging around $20 to send money to Venezuela. And if you want to send $20, which is the average ticket that people are sending back home, you're paying 100% for the transfer. So it's actually crazy. And in general, in average, internationally, Western Union charges 20% globally, which is ridiculous for sending money to another country. And other crypto startups, which is the reason why, the one thing that we got into into Y Combinator is because of a specific insight, right? And we saw that most crypto companies were building their own tokens, their own cryptos. And the problem is that now they have to build liquidity. And the problem is that building liquidity is extremely, extremely hard. So we said like, well, what if we use existing cryptos that already have existing liquidity to be the rails for moving fiat to fiat? We just buy crypto locally with the local fiat, and then we sell that crypto in the country of destination for the local fiat, which is directly transferred to the recipient's bank account. Or I'll explain specifically why, because in Venezuela everybody has a bank account and cash is worthless. So it's nice that you brought up Africa, because in Kenya you have this company called M-Pesa, and they were able to succeed because it was a very specific situation. The same thing happens to us. Super specific, the reason why we can actually execute in this market. Venezuela has hyperinflation, there's no cash, everybody has a bank account, there's high liquidity of Bitcoin. In Colombia, the same thing, super high liquidity of Bitcoin. It's the fourth and fifth countries in the world with highest local liquidity. And then you have all this migration. um, in Colombia that needs to send money back home. So it's super specific. But then we started like looking further and looking, well, can this solution be applied to some other corridors? And it is definitely it's a big yes. We've achieved very fast and very low cost transactions through the use of crypto rails instead of banking infrastructure. And so even for companies, we're looking in the future. Next year, we're probably going to launch for international transfer for companies, so big volume. So if you want to pay employees across borders in Peru, you can pay them in one click. And so it can really, the technology per se can really be applied to the crypto rails, can be applied to any corridor. But we're going to focus initially on closed economies. And that means Venezuela, Argentina right now, because they're imposing capital controls as we speak, which is important, an important piece of the puzzle for us to be a solution in that country. We think that Argentinians might be migrating soon if the country goes in the direction that we think is going to happen, because it's the same thing that happened in Venezuela. Argentina is kind of like, it's a mirror to that. And then we have Mexico, which is an interesting thing, which already has migration, a lot of migration in the US. It's actually the biggest corridor in the Western Hemisphere for sending remittances between the United States and Mexico, but they don't have capital controls. However, the new president, which is also a guy he's a little bit of a left-wing guy. He is looking to tax the rich, basically, for the things that they have outside of Mexico. So it's a somewhat like a capital control thing, and we're starting to see trends in the whole continent, South America and Central America, of this. So hopefully we can be a solution to all those countries and the people that actually are the people that get affected by these situations at the end.
So that's really interesting. So you're a crypto company, but you're not a crypto company, because you're a crypto company because you're using the infrastructure that Bitcoin has created, but then you're using that as a pipe, basically. And it's a beautiful pipe because it's outside of the control of any centralized government. And then you're essentially using the fiat currency within the economy, and then you're using the Bitcoin to transfer across the economy. That's really interesting. And I imagine must be kind of nerve-wracking for you as well, as because you're facing these governments which don't want you to do that, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. Dude, initially when I started the company, I had to think long and hard, because once we knew what we had in our hands, once we knew we had this solution and we wanted to execute, the question was like, will I go to jail, or will I actually become a successful entrepreneur in a successful company that solves a big problem, right? And yeah, one day I was like, man, I'm Venezuelan. I've been in startups and in tech for a long time. I want to start my company. If I'm gonna do something, it has to make sense for me. And this just made a lot of sense. And I was like, man, I'm gonna risk it all. And I went for it. And so far, we've been setting the security protocols for us to be kind of like hard to find. But yeah, that's what we're facing. Yeah.
That is really cool. So I want to talk more about kind of Venezuela and growing up there. How long ago did you move from there to either Colombia or outside of Venezuela?
So so my mom is Colombian, my dad is Venezuelan, which has helped a lot, having double nationality. The first time I left the country was in 2007. I went to play soccer for a Real Madrid young team. When I was 13. I played there for 2 years and decided to quit because it's incredible, man. Like, you get to that level and then there's another level, which is just natural skill. So I realized that when I was very young, I saw the best players getting kind of like drafted already for the first division teams. And I didn't see myself there. So I quit it when I was 15, went back home, finished high school. and then got a scholarship for doing industrial design in Savannah College of Art and Design. It's a school in Georgia, in Georgia, yeah. And basically, I did 4 years, graduated, worked in Miami. And the thing about industrial design, which I never actually kind of like executed, I never became an industrial designer, but it gave me the tools to think that anything can be done better, that everything should be done designed better. And in business, that mindset it's quite powerful. For not only for like building a company or whatever, even like for the day-to-day decisions, you're always kind of like thinking, how can I do this better? How can I improve? How can I design my day? How can I design my time? How can I design everything that I do? And that's kind of like the mindset that I kind of like, that's what I learned from school mostly. But when I came to my first job, I did it UX in a company accelerator called Rocker Labs in Miami. And that company, one of the founders was Colombian. So after 1 year in the OPT, which is a visa extension, that as an international student in the US, you get a visa extension for working 1 year. They transferred me to Colombia. When I came to Colombia, because my mom's Colombian, I had 2 nationalities, I was impressed with the ecosystem. I was impressed with the country itself. Colombia has been a poor country for decades, because they had an internal war with the guerrilla. But lately, with the peace treaty and everything that has been going, the oil prices came up, and economy started to flourish. And when I first arrived to Colombia, I was impressed. The startup ecosystem was starting to arise. Rappi was just launching. Lifted, which is another company that I work for, was just launching. In Colombia, even though it's a small country inside of South America, has proven to be, I think, the place where the best entrepreneurs come from, or the biggest companies are coming from. So yeah, I stayed here, super happy. I've been here for 4 years, and it's been a great experience.
Yeah, I've been noticing something interesting happening, particularly in Bogota, because you have Rappi was started there, and then there was another startup, Platzi, also another YC Combinator, also in Bogota. And it's interesting because there's Bogota, but then there's also Mexico City. Do you have any plans to kind of check that out? Because I believe that Mexico City is kind of becoming like a big gravity swell for a lot of startups, because you can both access the Latin American market from there and build solutions for the Latin American market, but then also have much closer kind of connection with the United States, although Colombia has a lot of connections with the United States as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mexico, Brazil as well. I think those two are the biggest like centrical points in South America for and biggest economies in a way. The city of Mexico, I think it's like 20 million people living there. Sao Paulo as well. So they're huge cities, huge economies, super dense, super populated. So you can start a company there and test something and try things really quick. So they're great for that. For me, I really want to focus right now on solving the Venezuelan problem. So here in Colombia, we have a lot of market to grow. There's $10 billion being sent to Venezuela on a yearly basis. And it's completely unattended. Like that's not much in an order of magnitude globally, but the fact that it's an unattended market is huge. So we really want to dominate this market, and to be honest, get a monopoly here. And we're analyzing as we go. While we do this, I think it's going to take us a little bit like a 1 year, 2 year tops. And we're going to expand to Mexico, either Mexico or Argentina. Mm-hmm. So depending on the funding as well, we can do both. But like I was mentioning, Argentina has capital controls, no migration. So let's see if the migration happens. Mexico has migration, no capital controls. So let's see if the capital controls get imposed. So depending on those two things, the decision will be made.
And that is really interesting, especially as we seem to be entering an age of kind of global political contraction, where like in the United States, we've kind of had this theory. I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The End of History. Did you ever hear about that book, The End of History?
I haven't.
No, so it's written by Francis Fukuyama in the late 90s, a political historian and theorist. He said that basically we have reached the end of history. There will be no more history. Basically, we've reached this kind of liberal, neoliberal kind of paradise where the United States is in power and is going to remain in power for a very long time and is going to remain dominant. And basically, history as we know it has come to an end. It turns out he was very, very wrong, and that like history has now essentially established itself again, and we do seem to be going through a period of transition. The United States is going to remain dominant for a long time, but relative dominance is going to change. Basically, I mean, China has a middle class, which is the entire size of the United States. They have 300 million people in their middle class, which is the entire size of the United States. Russia has power, but a lot of problems. India, in terms of their knowledge, is going to just revolutionize, particularly connected with the internet. You have so many young people in India, and China is declining in terms of its power. And then you have Africa, like Nigeria, Brazil, you have Latin America, but there's going to be a lot of transition and a lot of crazy stuff that's about to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, from my point of view. And it does seem like you guys have an interesting insight into, because Venezuela is like the first example of what might be down the road for a lot of other countries in terms of populist risings and things like that.
Totally. I totally agree with you, man. And we didn't plan for this. I honestly, when I started this company, we wanted, my co-founder and myself, we wanted to do something with crypto, and we wanted to do because we just fell in love with it. And when Ethereum came out, actually, when Bitcoin came out, we didn't know much about it, and then smart contracts came out. We were working in the same company. This was 2014, and we sort of like, oh man, what is this? My co-founder went on to build a crypto ATM company in Florida, and I was moved to Colombia. And then we met again in Colombia, and we said, like, dude, we just clicked, and we said, let's do something with crypto that is actually solving a real problem. And Venezuela was the perfect place because a lot of crypto adoption because of the political and economical situation. And we're like, well, there's a lot of people mining, there's a lot of people buying crypto. What should we do? And so we pivoted 3 times, and I'm not gonna get into the details, but we pivoted 3 times until we found this solution. And it's perfect. It's honestly, I haven't seen much crypto companies solving real problems with this technology. And so I need to tweet more about it. I need to start talking more about it to show this example, because the world, I think, needs to see that it has a use. It has a real use case. And even crypto companies get excited when they hear about us. I was just in Mexico with the founder of Pixo, and he's like, dude, you have to come to my office and talk to my employees about what you do, because they're here every day building code, and our users are just buying crypto, but they don't have a purpose behind it, right? And so it really just started like that. But little by little, we've seen that the world is actually going in a direction where with democracies, which is a name we invented, in my opinion, because it's governments of representatives of republics, which is actually, you don't see the word democracy in the US Constitution or in the French Constitution. It's representative republics. Basically, you vote for somebody, you give them full power for 4 years to do whatever they want, pretty much. And now with the parliament, if they win all the majority, it's kind of like it's almost like a dictatorship, right? And so we've seen that the political systems in the world are not working that well. And so that is kind of like the risk for most countries, that most countries can be hacked easily. It all started in Russia, in my opinion. Then it spread through Cuba. In Cuba, it happened really quickly. Then from Cuba to Venezuela, from Venezuela to and on and on and on. And so, yeah, man, I completely agree with you on that end. hopefully we can be a solution. Unluckily, this is happening in the world. But the way we see it, instead of like, hey, let's hope that some country goes to shit, we're saying like, well, if they go to shit, we'll be there.
Yeah.
Something
Well,
like
and it's this is the really kind of promise of Bitcoin, I think, essentially is that, and the design of it as well was designed so that they had 2008 and the financial crisis that kind of ripped through the economic system of the world, and the taking, you know, I might feel free to criticize what I'm about to say because I'm not an expert in this at all, but you know, you have monetary controls, or you basically detached the US dollar from the gold reserve as a kind of a basis for the value of the US dollar. You can print money like crazy, and then in 2008 you have like the fallback from that, and maybe the first fallback, and we're probably going to see another fallback from that. It looks like, you know, this is not ending anytime soon, this kind of changing money from, and then they created Bitcoin, which is essentially, you know, the mining capacity, the proof of work is established some sort of value that people believe in that's tied to this currency, which has been around for 10 years now. And, you know, the longer something's been around, the longer it's going to continue to be around, generally, according to the Lindy effect. So it's established this currency that is outside the political control of different governments, although there is a nuance to that, which is that, you know, something like Coinbase does have influence from the government. In China, the government does have influence on the miners. So there is influence, but it is essentially that is no one government has control over the actual currency itself. And what I think is very elegant, which you guys have done, is essentially used it as that thing, which is the international currency that it is. Like, if I wanted to send you money and we're not doing anything illegal, then I could send you money today using Bitcoin with no transaction things, and the government won't care because we're not doing anything illegal. So I think there's something interesting there, and it does serve as this kind of bulwark against a crazy government.
Totally. The talking about like what we do, and for me, I've never been kind of like a, you know, fuck the government kind of thing. I've always been like, you know, unfortunately, the infrastructure and how governments work are not super efficient today. And so if we can be more efficient, if we can even like work with them, that's great. Because we do want to work with them, right? If we want to grow a lot and we want to actually become a big company, we need to work with local banks. And so that's what we're offering, fiat to fiat transfers. We're not saying, hey, just pay in Bitcoin, we'll give you Bitcoin wallets. We're actually saying, hey, we're taking your fiat and converting it to fiat. We're just using crypto for now. And this is kind of like a way to show what we do. And the interesting part that I completely love about this is that remittances have today in the banking infrastructure, one of the reasons why it is so expensive is because no government wants capital fleeing their country. They want to keep their capital in the country. So that's why they put so many kind of like taxes and like high kind of like cost licenses. And with this system, when you buy crypto locally, you're just taking the local fiat and giving it to somebody else locally, and you're receiving this digital asset that just mirrors the value of the local fiat. And then you can transfer it somewhere else, but there's no capital leaving the country. It's just a mirror that it's happening, and it's a redistribution of capital locally, and then another redistribution of capital in the country of destination, because in the country of destination, you're selling that crypto to somebody locally that transfers the money to the remittance recipient. And so this redistribution of capital is quite interesting because it allows us to bypass a lot of the remittance regulation. And we honestly, like legally in Colombia, we're just crypto buyer and seller. And we're not a remittance company legally because we're not taking money out of the country and putting it somewhere else. We're just buying crypto and then selling crypto. And so yeah, man. I honestly think that, but for us to grow, Bitcoin has been great for closed economies, I would say, and for authoritarian governments. And talking about like people don't need to trust in Bitcoin today for our system, which is the interesting thing. In stage two, talking about trust, and in stage two of the company, we're going to allow people to save money on this digital wallet. And the problem is that our users are low financial and low technical literacy. So we're targeting a user that is super fucking hard to target through a mobile app. So, but people know the dollar. People don't know the Bitcoin. They're starting to know it here in Venezuela and Colombia because it's just so big here. But people don't know about DAI. People don't know about Ethereum. People don't know about all that, right? And so we want to give people dollars, and the way for us to do this is through stablecoins. And we're gonna just say like, you have $10, and we're gonna put in big letters USD, and then the other letter that is whatever crypto we decide to use, super tiny. And people are gonna believe that they have dollars, but they in reality have stablecoins, right? So talking about the stablecoins, which one are we going to use? Because like I mentioned, we are not going to build our own crypto. We don't want to do anything with that. We want to leverage existing liquidity and existing cryptos that already exist. So we're seeing DAI, which is an algorithmic stablecoin, which we love. We're seeing Reserve because they're super hands-on, and they're actually in Venezuela getting their hands dirty, and they're the only ones in the crypto space from San Francisco that are actually doing shit. We're seeing, Stellar, which has great technology for international payments, and we're seeing and Stellar with Anchor USD. And so we're making this decision. We realize that the main thing that we need is liquidity, and which is the liquidity that USDT Tether. And even though Tether has all this bad reputation, and it's still the most liquid, it's still what people trust. People don't give a fuck if it's backed by anything, man. Like, as long as there's trust around that, things become somewhat stable, I would say. And so it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting phenomena because I'm not an economist, but a lot of my friends that are economists tell me that even the United States economy is not backed by anything. When you actually go down to the nitty gritty, it's not backed by anything. So, but people trust the US dollar. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. I hope the US dollar keeps being the kind of like the international kind of like value currency that people value, or the US dollar or crypto. But it really scares me to think that China is gaining so much power, specifically with their,
I mean, I personally don't see a future in which the Chinese yuan will become the dominant global currency. I mean, maybe if they increase their kind of influence in Africa and in Latin America to the point where in like 10, 15, 20 years that they have so much influence that the yuan is actually used. But I don't see that happening because China has so many issues. It's and everybody in China knows that, like the people running the country know that they have a lot of issues, like a declining birth rate, the lack of like resources that they can essentially use in the state of a worldwide conflict. Like, I think so. It's which is scary, but because they have such a large population and so many people have moved from poverty into abundance, and now like if you start to have that change, that's going to become very scary for the global economic system.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Specifically because, I was talking with a friend recently, and poverty is kind of like, it's relative, I would say. I was just in Colombia, in the most dense place in the world. It's called Islote de San Bernardo, or San Bernardo Island. It's off the coast of Colombia, 1,400 people living in a super tiny area, and they are super away from like society. And they're not poor in food, right? These guys fish all day. They're strong. They're happy. They have a community. They have all these. Even I'm not gonna get into the details because I talked to them for a while. But they have a lot of rituals. One of the ones I love the most is that when somebody gets sick, everybody pitches in and they get like a boat, like a wooden canoe, and they pay for gas and they take them to Cartagena, which is like 3 hours away in boat from the island. And they have all these things, and they're rich in some ways, but very poor in education and all these things. What happened with the Industrial Revolution, specifically in China, is now you're bringing all these people from the fields into the city. Now they have knowledge. Now they understand what it is to be rich. You know, they have all these concepts, and they're observing all these things, but they're just workers. And with the automation that is coming for the industrial kind of sector, you're gonna have all these people without jobs, but they're already rich in context, and so they're gonna become very poor because they already know, they're already immersed in our world, kind of thing. So I don't know why we got into this, but yeah, I was talking about this. Like, I think like some big challenge. We're gonna have some big challenges coming, and I don't know if UBI is the solution. A lot of people talk about this, but you know, we need more solutions. We need to test these things. You know.
So I'd love to talk now more about the rise of startups outside of Silicon Valley, and maybe how you guys got into Y Combinator as well. And then like, what is the significance of like you starting a company outside of Silicon Valley, but still kind of having the thread here as well?
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to go to school in the United States, which is where kind of like my English got better, because I've been studying English since I was very young. But I was also lucky that one of the founders of a company that I worked for here in South America was coming from San Francisco. And I was hired as the head of sales. And he was coming with all this knowledge, all this kind of like street knowledge. I would call it street knowledge, but from Silicon Valley that people here don't have. And so because of my English, we got along really well, more than most people. And he was taking me to all his investor meetings. Whenever he needed some help, I would like get into the conversation with investors, and I trained with him almost for like 2 years. And so that really helped a lot to understand how to start a company, kind of like the 0 to 1 kind of thing, which is always really, really hard. And so I would say that mentors have helped a lot for me. And some people say like, hey, if you want to start a startup, just do it. And like people from Silicon Valley, I've heard podcasts about this, like, oh, just do it. But for me, honestly, like coming from South America, it was super, super impactful and rich to work for, have mentors that already knew what we're doing, and become friends with them, and go to run with them every Sunday, see their problems, and kind of like, I was almost like a founder when I was hired for these companies. I would work Monday to Sunday, you know, very hard all the time. And I was not expecting anything back. I was just happy to be learning all these things. So that helped a lot. And when the time came to start my company, I already knew what to do, which is simple, is open a Delaware corporation, very standard, open a US bank account. That's where you're gonna get all. Use the safe, standard YC safe. We also have like an upper hand here in South America, which is way cheaper. Talent is cheaper, offices are cheaper. So we started with a $50,000 check, and that gave us enough runway to like me, my co-founder, and even 2 hires for quite a while, and we were able to show that we were able to execute. And little by little, I started, you know, bringing in more checks as we were showing numbers, we were showing traction. And in March of this year, I decided to apply for YC. And since I've been in sales, when I was in Broker Labs, I quickly switched from UX to sales. So I've been doing sales and business development for most of my career. And basically, I used those skills to apply for YC. What did I do? I reached out through LinkedIn through all these founders, and basically had like a funnel of 200 founders, which 50 replied, 20 gave me feedback, and around 10 gave me mock interviews. So it was like a constant process of writing feedback, and getting to the one thing that YC loves is no BS, no bullshit. So how to write very concise and how to explain what you do. They call it the granny test. If you can explain what you do easily to your grandmother, then you have something, right? So that's kind of like how we got into YC, and we basically were able to execute. We showed that we had some good insights, and that the market, it was the right time in the right market, basically.
And it's so interesting because we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, about how your English allowed you to enter this whole world. But for other founders in Colombia who don't have this good command of English, or who don't kind of read naturally in English, they won't get access to Paul Graham's essays. They won't get access to kind of, who are some Jason Lemkin, like all of these people who are like creating this content in English, but that it doesn't get translated over into Spanish. And I wonder if you have any other thoughts on that, and like what you see, because that's what I want to do for this show once I get down to Colombia, is to start doing a lot more interviews in Spanish, because it's not that there isn't that content, but the content there is, I imagine, in Spanish isn't related to the actual difficulty and the truth and the kind of like how hard it is to start a company, and like you said, that street smarts that only comes from somebody who's doing it.
Yeah, I think there's if we can like split knowledge in like 3 tiers. The first tier, we might have it here. The second tier, starting to happen little by little. Some of the new companies that are, Rappi, Nubank, all these companies that are flourishing, hiring all this talent, raising all this money, and the knowledge is starting to spread, kind of in like this second tier. But then you have third tier knowledge, which is the knowledge that you can read from, Peter Thiel, Paul Graham, all these guys that is like not only super specific, but it's also shared in a very technical grammar, and in English, which completely changes the context, which completely changes the meaning of what they're sharing, right? And so that is the type of knowledge that you don't get here in Spanish, and that will completely change things. But yeah, most people, man, like I know so many entrepreneurs that it's hard, because right now I don't really have the time to be like, hey, I'll help you out. At the beginning, I was a little bit more like that. Hopefully I can find the time in the future to be more helpful, but there's so many entrepreneurs that just don't know what they're doing here. And it's shitty, because a lot of them are smart. They're just like, they just don't have the tools and to be better. And so I think if you want to do Spanish content, that would be super helpful. And the more people that is doing this, the better. And the one thing that I was always thought it would be really impactful is to have something like a software, a podcast, or like something software that translates in Spanish, and it's audio, and it can even translate like Paul Graham articles to Spanish in audio. That would be great, because also I've seen that most people in Latin America don't read that much. People here like to listen more and to watch more videos mostly. So audio is powerful for sure.
Interesting. And that's something that's only happening in the United States recently, is this move towards audio and move towards podcasts, because traditionally on the internet, if you just read something, and then only recently has it turned to audio. But that's interesting in Latin America, because the primary way that I've seen people communicate there, and I actually picked up the habit myself, was using WhatsApp to send voice messages. And if you think about it, it is easier. I would now much rather send a voice message if it's not something specific, like, hey, do you want to meet at this time? Or like, something like that. If it's something more like an expression, like, hey, these are all my thoughts about this subject, it's way, way easier to send a voice message. But you don't do that in the United States. Like, people find it weird. Like, I don't know if you've had that experience before.
It's tough. I'm very opinionated on this one, like most things. But I think I try not to use voice notes, even though I'm here in Spanish in South America, because I think voice notes are rude. I think voice notes make the counterparty have more job. You're giving the job to the counterparty, where it's like, hey, I'm gonna ramble for like a minute, and then you have to pick up on the things that I want to say. And the one thing that I learned in YC is how to say things concisely. So I'm always practicing that. Like, even like if I want to ramble for 2 minutes, I'm like, well, what do I really want to say in these 2 minutes? And then I try to send the text, which is, in my opinion, like a respectful way with the counterparty.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think so. Yeah, what you're saying is that writing is even more concise than audio or than speaking.
Yeah, if you can convey your idea or what you want to express in writing, and it's also almost like a demonstration of intelligence. Also, I would say, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that, but I think that there is something about voice which emotionally gets lost in text, because there's so much tone and there's so much emotion and other types of signals that get wrapped up in voice. And then you add video to it as well. And then video becomes a whole nother, then you get body language and everything like that. So I think it depends on the message. And that might be more like, if it makes more sense to send voice messages if you're with your friends or your your lovers or something like that. But if it's in a business sense, then I think you're right that the shorter, concise way of sending the message is the more important part.
Totally. Yeah, it definitely depends on the context. For me, I love podcasts. I stopped listening music while I'm not doing. The only moments I listen to music is while I'm doing sports or gym or something like that. But if I'm in the office and I want to like put my headphones on, and I usually listen to podcasts when I'm walking from point A to point B. Podcast and yeah, I think for some things it's better audio, but if for like kind of like messaging communication between two people, text I think it should be better. Yeah.
So, and you were on a Spanish-speaking podcast. How big is the market for Spanish-speaking podcasts? Is it growing? What's the deal with that?
It is. A lot of the YC companies. There's a few YC companies, and there's one in Mexico that is doing Spanish podcasts, and so it's kind of like, yeah. I can share with you. Give me 1 second. There's so many YC companies, man. I forget the names. We have a YC WhatsApp group. It's called YC of the South. All of the South American companies that have been through YC.
That's cool.
And there's this girl who is the CEO of this podcast. I've heard she's super sharp. I don't know her personally. All right. Mm-hmm. If you want, I can share with you after this.
Sure. Yeah. I'll get it from you later. Well, this has been really cool. And I'm going to ask one more question to wrap it up. Is there a question that I haven't asked yet that I should have asked you?
Let me see. I think more than what you should ask, I think something that I want to say, I think it's more important. I was hearing this podcast from Peter Thiel today, and he was explaining how Anna Karenina, in her book, she talks about how all happy families are unhappy in some ways, in that in businesses, it's the opposite. the saying, it goes like, all companies that are happy are doing something that is completely different, right? Where employees are happy are doing something that is completely different. All companies that are really unhappy in the end are doing something that is just the same. And today I also saw a tweet from this guy from A60C, the Andreessen Horowitz, and he was saying, all these ex-Ubers are making a lot of impact in the world. Scooter companies in Singapore, cloud kitchens in whatever. And it's like, dude, like, everybody's doing scooter companies, everybody's doing cloud kitchens, everybody's doing all these things. And Peter Thiel is saying that most of these people that work for these companies are in the end not so happy. They might just be there just for the opportunity, and they might change jobs quickly. So I've seen that the fact that we're doing something so unique, my team, I'm super excited about my team, and like so proud to be part of this. They're all amazing, and they're just like really aligned with the vision of helping migrants, building a digital bank for the unbanked, helping like getting into closed economies, which is quite exciting, and like everything that we do is like super adrenaline high, and so we're doing something really different, and we're paving the way, and it's hard. Raising money has been hard. We've already raised over $1 million, but the hardest thing is about to come. And that's fine. I think we're paving the way, like Uber did at their time, like Airbnb did at their time. We're building a new infrastructure, banking infrastructure, built in crypto, and so I think that's just something that it's important for people to take into account. If founders are listening to me, it's like, man, don't just start a company. Just like try to really find something that makes you passionate, and that is something new, and that is gonna be way harder than just raising some millions of dollars and buying scooters in China and launching an app, right? And so yeah, it's kind of like that's my kind of like suggestion to wrap it up.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. And how can people find out more about you and more about Value?
So you can find me on Twitter, Chamorro Design, at Chamorro Design. It's my last name and design. And about Value, you can find us on www.value.com. Value is spelled differently. It's VALIU, almost like the drug, like Valium, but without the M. But even in English and in Spanish, people pronounce it as Value. So that's the reason we chose the name, value.com. We also have, our app is actually just in Spanish because we're on this market, but you can also find us on LinkedIn. You can look me up on LinkedIn. I don't have Instagram, I don't have Facebook. I'm closing those out.
Cool.
But yeah.
It's funny because I always pronounce it valio. Like there's a Portuguese slang word in Brazil, valio, which means like cool. And so I thought it was related to that. But cool. Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you, Stewart. It was great talking to you.